Good morning, everyone. This morning, we're joined by Professor Ella Washington, Professor of the Practice at our McDonough School of Business. And Professor Washington, thank you for being a part of our Georgetown Now conversation series. It's a pleasure to have this chance to talk with you about your work. So let's get started. Could you share a little bit about your background and tell us more about the areas of focus for your work in organizational leadership and diversity? What are some of the key insights and ideas that you seek to explore in your scholarship and teaching?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to connect with the community in this particular way. A little bit about me, I've been at Georgetown for the last 2 years. It's been a fantastic journey. My work, as you mentioned, has always focused in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion and leadership as well. And one thing that's a bit unique about me is that I consider myself a true research practitioner. And so prior to coming to Georgetown, I actually had a career in consulting where I was a human capital consultant and I led diversity and inclusion efforts for global clients. And so I have a lot of kind of real business experience, but I've always had the love for research. And so what's really cool about being back at Georgetown in the academic space is now I'm able to not only teach around the things that I, learned as a consultant and heard from leaders globally, but also able to continue to do research. And so some of the areas that I've been doing current research are on the journeys around diversity and inclusion. So, we all hear organizations and leaders saying, oh, diversity and inclusion is a journey, but what does it really mean? And so part of the work that my colleagues and I are doing right now is to really codify what are those stages of the DEI journey from an organizational kind of macro perspective. And also, what does it mean for organizations to be committed long-term to diversity and inclusion? On the more micro level, I'm studying chief diversity officers. So you may or may not know, but chief diversity officers have a immensely high level of turnover. And many organizations have either rehired their chief diversity officers, of course, in the past, 6 to 8 months, or developed brand new positions that they never had before in this space. And so what I am studying is, what does it take for a CDO to be successful? What are some of the barriers that they face, and how can we make sure to create organizational environments so that chief diversity officers can do that important work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and be successful?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, this past January, you co-authored an article in the Harvard Business Review titled How to Talk with Your Team About the Violence at the US Capitol. And in this article, you address the challenge that leaders can have in discussing current events that elicit strong opinions and emotions. Can you talk about this work and what successes or obstacles have you witnessed as an outcome of the work that you've engaged as a scholar?
Yeah, so, back on June 1st of 2020, my colleague, Laura Morgan Roberts, and we actually did a HBR piece that talked about what US businesses and what US leaders need to be doing in the face of the racial reckoning that was happening. I actually had the honor of quoting you in that particular HBR piece and the message that you sent out to the university around that time. And so in that article, we really encourage leaders to speak up and say something and have these dialogues and have conversation. Now, fast forwarding literally almost to the day, 6 months where we had the insurrection at the Capitol, it was an opportunity for people to put into practice the things that they hopefully have been, developing their skills over the past 6 months around having these conversations. And so, with that piece that came out in January, our thought was, how can we give leaders the nudge to, if you're wondering if I should talk about this, should I say something to my team tomorrow? You absolutely should. And in that article, we gave some tips of how to do that, how to create this space, how to make people feel welcome, what are the key things that messages that employees should be taking home. I think as an educator, I actually learned in that vein from my classroom experiences, because what I was noticing over the past year with all the things that have happened from, COVID-19 to the racial reckoning last summer to the election in November is that anytime those things were happening, students were feeling it. Students were feeling discomfort, they were feeling anxious, they were feeling a whole sort of different things. And so what I had to do is make sure I was creating space in the classroom to say, hey, how are y'all doing? Let's check in. Let's just take the first 10 minutes of class and like, let me just check in. And, sometimes people would think that students would be quiet in those moments, but they actually felt, I think, in a safe space around their peers to really share, it's been really difficult studying on my own at home, or, I'm really nervous about what's going to happen in the election in a few days. And so I learned from those experiences the importance of creating space for my students. And I figured that leaders can learn from that too, trying to create those same type of spaces in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, as a member of the management faculty at our McDonough School, you've taught courses such as innovation through inclusion, leading teams, negotiation. What are some of the most important issues you're addressing with students this year? And what has it been like to engage these topics with students in the graduate program who bring with them a number of prior career experiences and academic paths?
Certainly. So one of the courses that I'm most proud of is the graduate level MBA course, the Innovation Through Inclusion. And that course is all about giving our students kind of that foundational information around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also pushing them to think outside of the box, to think about the white space in the area of diversity and inclusion. So what are some things that haven't been tapped into? What are some areas that we can think outside of the box and push ourselves to be better in the DEI space? And so what was really fantastic about launching that class this past fall was that students were tasked with creating a project that they were creating a new idea based off of an unmet need in some way. So it could be a demographic group, it could be a community, but it's some unmet need in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion. And what was so fantastic is that the ideas they came up with, I could have never even thought of myself. They were really bringing those past experiences that you're talking about to the classroom. And so that was such a fun experience. We're going to continue to have that class for the future MBA students. And I'm really excited to see how it continues to evolve.
That's great. Thank you. Now, you also work directly with organizations and leaders who are seeking to strengthen their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Can you talk a little bit about this work, and how do you approach drawing upon your scholarship when you are engaged in working with organizations and leaders?
Yeah. So, one of the things that has always been a challenge for me, even since my grad school days, is I feel like, as a business scholar, we're not talking enough to business leaders, and business leaders aren't connecting enough with the fantastic scholarship that, my colleagues in the management space are doing. And so I truly make it my mission to bring to light the cool studies my colleagues are, publishing in journals, and bringing back to my colleagues, hey, I'm hearing leaders talk about this issue a lot. Is anybody studying this? Maybe we should launch a study around that. And so I really try to be that conduit. And I think where I see leaders really leaning in is that, they're always looking for answers. And so when they find out, even though it's not a secret, they find out that there are, academic studies that have looked at the very issues they're having. I mean, they want to eat it all up. They're like, tell me more, how can I learn more about this? And so I really enjoy that part of it. And I pride myself on bringing new information to leaders that maybe they wouldn't have been tuned into if they hadn't, been interfacing with the research and practitioner side.
Well, thank you. Now, this fall, you began co-hosting a podcast from the Gallup Center on Black Voices called Cultural Competence. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and about the urgency of these conversations following some of the dynamics of this past year that you've described?
So cultural competence, was an opportunity through, as you mentioned, the Gallup Center for Black Voices. They just launched this wonderful initiative where they are pledging to study the lives and experiences of Black people for the next 100 years, which is a really big deal. Gallup, it was my previous employer before Georgetown, and they've been always known to, get the pulse of what's happening in the world, but they had never really zoned in on understanding certain diverse populations, such as Black people. And so they made that pledge, and we took that as an opportunity to say, well, how can we continue to further the conversation? How do we make sure we're getting the data that the center is finding? How do we make sure we're connecting it to relevant conversations that leaders and scholars alike need to hear? And so we created this podcast. And, I'll be honest, I hadn't really listened to many podcasts before. So I was really learning on the job. But now I know all about the podcast world. But it's a whole different world. And I really quite enjoyed it. I think it's an avenue to get good knowledge out there, drive some insightful conversations, but also have some fun too. So it's one of the recent projects I've really been enjoying.
On another day, maybe we'll explore what makes for a great podcast. But
we will have to. Well, maybe we'll just have you on the podcast, Jack, so you can come in and show us.
I'm sure your ratings would probably take a hit if I were your guest. I can't thank you enough for taking this time to share your reflections with us. As we close, is there a message you'd like to share with our university community?
Absolutely. So, one thing, I've been super proud to work for Georgetown, especially in these challenging times that we've all experienced over this past year. And there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of action around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I would just encourage everyone that's listening here today to remember that it is a journey. It will take time, and change won't happen overnight. But I'm so proud of our students, so proud of our faculty and staff that have really been leaning in this moment. And I'm just excited to see what will happen in the future as we all continue on these efforts to make diversity and inclusion a continued priority.
Well, again, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your leadership in our community. And it's a privilege to be able to spend this time together with you. I look forward to being with all of you again soon. And I wish you all the very best. Take care of yourselves. Take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.